Okay, cool. George, now we can start.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this third day FEST plenary session. We have two speakers, Sebastian Li and Professor Ronki Ram. So my job is to invite Johnny Z to chair this session. So let me go straight into his bio. Tony is currently Associate Professor teaching Political Philosophy and International Relations for the University of London programs in the Singapore Institute of Management, Global Education in Singapore, SIMG. His research interests include comparative philosophy, critical theory, and media studies. His current research interest is in exploring theories of subjectivity with a focus on the intersections between Deleuze's idea of immanence and desire and its resonances with the idea of Buddha nature in Mahayana Buddhism. His previous publications include the book Community Without Identity, The Ontology and Politics of Heidegger, 2009, and a number of articles such as Deleuze and Mahayana Buddhism, 2014, Deleuze and Ikeda, 2015, and Deleuze Religion and Education, 2016. Now, let me pass it over to Tony C. to take over. Over to Tony.
Thank you very much, George. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very happy to be chairing this session for two very distinguished professors, Dr. Ronki Ram and Dr. Sebastian Liao, Professor Sebastian Liao, Xian Hao from Taiwan. So allow me to give a brief introduction to both professors, right? And before we start, right? So Professor Ronki Ram is currently the Shahid Bhagat Singh Chair Professor of Political Science at Punjab University, Chandigarh, and he's the visiting professor in the Faculty of Arts, Business and Social Sciences in the University of Wolverhampton in UK, and member of the State of Higher Education Council, UT Chandigarh. And he served as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts as the Ordinary Director of ICSSR and WRC. And he's a member of the Indian National Commission of Cooperation with UNESCO. And he has served as the President of PUTA in 2004 and 2008. And he's the Guardian Professor of Government College, Holshapur. So apparently he is very highly distinguished and has worked in many areas in education in different states. So, and he has also served as a teaching and research professor in Punjab University and Jawaharlal Nehru University, Uppsala University, Goa University, Leiden University, and Ryukoku University in Kyoto, Japan. Okay, so may I invite Professor Ronki Ram, right, to give us his delivery of his paper, and then you have 30 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A. Then after that, I will introduce Professor Sebastian Liao accordingly, right, before his presentation. So let's have a round of applause for Professor Ronki Ram. Okay.
Thank you. Nice introduction. And, thanks, Manoj and George, for the invitation. I would talk about caste in a larger perspective of Deleuzean philosophy, Deleuze-Guattarian philosophy. Caste is highly contestable theme in India. It has been very critically analyzed from within and without. A lot of scholars, social anthropologists, sociologists, have been working on caste. there is no dearth of scholars in philosophy who did talk about. But for the last few decades, we find more of social anthropologists working on caste. So much so that we find that caste has led to a specific journal, Contributions to Indian Sociology. And there was a great debate. Can there be an Indian sociology? It was a great debate in Contributions when it was started in the mid-50s by Dumu and Pocock. So caste remained quite interesting. Here, when we talk about caste in the context of this very conference, I would like to touch upon some of the aspects of caste. Then I will try to relate how a caste can be decoded in the Deleuzian ideas of assemblies. Of course, we find references to Foucault when he was making an intervention from a critique of the Kantian perspective of the concepts and the intuition. So where he tries to develop knowledge through the object-centered knowledge as against the Kantian subject-centered knowledge. So these are the themes through which I will try to navigate in this. Caste predates modernity. And modernity, we have a certain, again, a doubt when it exactly started, Habermas, But the modernity project, did not dilute interest in the caste. Caste remained very much there, even in the context of modernity. Rather, it became very important in the very idea of, developing society from a industrial perspective, and like the Bavarian Protestants as a great ethics. So caste became important within that also. So much so that even the latest interventions by the scholars who say that Dalit capitalism in India, that has also generated a lot of discussion from that angle. So caste also survives, though with difference in contemporary era of post-colonial India. So in the post-colonial India, that's globalizing India, we find caste, are taking a sharp curve, especially with the inauguration of the Republic of India on 26th January 1950. So when we had a constitution, a new constitution. So in independent India, or you can use the new term which George and Manoj in their introduction to the latest book, they try to talk about that, how the post-colonial term has become more important in the Deleuze-Guattarian philosophy. So we find that. So in the independent India, the caste traveled into a nebulous state of being. But that state of being has been, quite mysteriously, I use the word not deliberately, mysteriously, into what Deleuze called deterritoriality. It's different from his deterritorial state of being. It's a deterritoriality, which leads to a deterritorialized state of affairs. So the deterritorial state of affairs is quite nebulous. You never know how many seconds, how many minutes, how many hours, or how many days and years that state of affairs would still be there. But it is nebulous. It will go. It's a continuous in a process. So in that, the post-colonial India, caste has entered into a nebulous deterritorial sphere, and it has taken a robust structure. Here I'm using the word robust structure, of re-territorialized form, in the constitution. where it has been taken a shelf in a position to suspend it, to annihilate it, to get rid of it. So now with this, we find it, the caste before the post-colonial India and in the medieval India and in the ancient India also, caste was very much there in the similar phase, in the similar form, somewhere. It was in a literature which is called sacred literature, so-called, or we can call it a literature which probably has a long span of time in the Dharmasastra. The Indologist termed it Dharmasastra literature. Thousands of years of that. A lot of texts are there where it has been tried to explain how the caste would come forward and how it will emerge. So, but we are trying to say, even if caste is there, in a form to be removing it in the new constitution with certain clauses, and caste in the Dharmasastra tradition. So ultimately, how we are going to find what exactly this caste is, how we find it, we find to understand it. By talking about this, we find that the caste as a diagram, or caste as an abstract machine, which the latest book, Manoj and George, they're trying to articulate, trying to apply the Deleuzian framework on the caste. You see, but when we talk about assemblages, there is something specific holes, and these holes are different from the conceptual term of hole. These holes are there, a lot many, and they are interrelated, not by their interiority, they are interrelated by their exteriority. There is nothing, specific connection between different assemblages holes. There is a number of assemblages holes. Each hole, has its own form. So somehow they are so heterogeneous, but at the same time, they got connected with each other and they become, a semblance. That semblance, has been brought together by something. That something we call, is a diagram. We call it as a something. We find it in the terms of an abstract machine. Abstract machine is what? Which creates the formation and deformation of the assemblages. There are different assemblages. So when we try to understand, so when we talk about a caste assemblies, and how this caste assemblies has been affected by a diagram, within that context, I'm trying to articulate caste. How the caste assemblies. So when we talk about the caste assemblies, we find different holes. What are those holes? They are the Varna system, the Varna, which is a categorizations of certain specific professions, and those professions are followed, hereditary, in a continuous fashion from a family to family. So these are the four Varnas, and these four Varnas are dividing the whole society into certain holes. There is a priest, one hole is a priest, the other one is a warrior, then the other one is a traders, and the other one is the artisans. And next also, the one which is doing a lot of jobs, through a manual intervention. Maybe some jobs are related impure. That I will bring for a while. Dumo's intervention into that. So we find it. So then we not only find these four holes, there are other holes which make the assemblance more important, the caste assemblance more important. Those four holes are the properties which you need to follow in order to become a perfect being, in the tradition of the Dharmasastra. These are the dharma, which is a following duty honestly. Dharma is not exact translation of the religion, but the dharma in a larger, Indology, understanding of the duties, dharam. Then we have a arth that translates exactly into gaining your livelihood, a straightforward way. That's arth. Then there is a kam, a player. How would you live the life? And the last is the moksha, that you receive the ultimate bliss. I don't say moksha is immanence of the delusion, ideas of immanence, but here moksha is something, relating. Slightly we can talk that maybe, but the delusion talks about immanence. We can hear in the caste assemblies, moksha is somewhere related with that. So we have 4 varnas. We have 4 ways to lead a life: dharma, arth, and kam, and moksha. Then we have another assemblies, another whole, which is in itself the assemblies. There are assemblies within assemblies. So caste becomes very complex. Caste is not a single assemblies. It is a multiple assemblies coming together. But I haven't encountered any such instance in the delusion or Gotarian philosophy where we find, a mighty assemblies is coming together. Assemblies has a mighty wholes. Mighty wholes are coming together, which make it assemblies. As Foucault tries to explain through his concept of prison, and we also find that how delusion ideas are explained through panopticon. How the panopticon is a way, which is a diagram, which is a the prison has been explained by many ways. So there are different wholes. Prison as a architecture, prison as a penal codes, then language through which the penal codes are made. Then the prisons, those who are taking guard on the prisoners, that again. So there are different wholes putting together, and the prison coming into existence. So caste has also come into existence accordingly over the centuries. So 4 varna, 4 properties, then 4 ashrams. So those 4 stages in life have been divided neatly into 25 years of span, in each. Like the brahmacharya, that when you have to follow your education, you have to keep yourself totally pure and not to get absorbed into any feelings of bodily pleasures. Brahmacharya, then grihastha, you become a family man and you perform all those duties to make the family perfect. Then you have a vanaprastha, when you try to go to understand what meditation could be. Then the last stage of the life would be sannyas. That is totally renunciation. But here again, in the 4 stages, in the 4 wholes, what are the basic, properties of your life have to be followed. So then the 4 varna, the 4 properties of living a life, and the 4 stages of the life, all these are to be governed by something, that governed by dharma. That dharma is something illegal documents through which you do it, and you're trying to enforce that system. Ultimately, when you're trying to segmentize the life into these different wholes, the complete life consisting of different wholes, becoming a single assemblies. That single assemblies, has been called the way of life in the Indian, tradition, where the caste becomes important. Now, how the caste becomes important in this sense, how we try to talk about caste from these angles, it's again very much interesting. So caste here, we find 2 understandings to make sense of the caste. The one understanding is the understanding of which we try to find it from a Kantian perspective, of which Deleuze did not agree, nor Foucault gave any importance. That caste as a a priori subject, as a priori theme which we try to understand. So when we try to find caste as a priori, then we try to understand caste through these holes, the 4 varna, the 4 ashrams, and the duties accordingly. So these are a priori. It's a given. It is there in the Manu Samriti. It is there in the Jagannath Valgya Samritis. It's there in the different Dharmashastra literature. You can find references of all such in P.B. Kane's literature on Dharmashastra, 5 volumes. So it's there. So mostly the scholars, the social anthropologists, including, they are trying to make sense of caste while going through these things. How this is a priori, and the other is which Foucault called about knowledge based on certain experiences of the object. There is the experience of the object. They try to call that somewhere we find that how the knowledge on the side of the object, becomes experiential. You try to experience that objects in your mind. So here we find it, something like, not a transcendental synthesis, but a formation of a knowledge on the basis of those given factors through which you try to articulate. Again here, Foucault was Deleuze make a critique of Foucault. He said that while making a knowledge, he follow a certain patterns of, a Kantian synthesis, of a 2 asymmetrical ends. One is the visible, and the other is, the articulable. So here, contrary to Kant, Foucault becomes a philosopher of exteriority. No, here when we call it exteriority, understanding, so can caste be understood as a posteriori theme, caste as a Foucauldian theme, caste as a posteriori? Who would be having the caste as a posteriori understanding? So here I will try to draw your attention. 2 ways of thinking has been going on for the last many decades to understand caste, especially after 1972, when we find a Dalit Panthers movement in India. Even before that, we find that when Ambedkar tries to talk about caste also. So the caste as articulated by the one who experienced this sort of a exclusion, and caste being articulated by a scholar who try to understand it as a thematic, a thematic theme of understanding. So in this case, the one who tries to understand caste, being a victims of that caste system, of that assemblance, he is making a posteriori idea of caste, Foucauldian idea of caste, and those who are trying to make an understanding of the caste, from an outside, they become in the Kantian sense, they make a transcendental synthesis of caste. So I try to relate that even the Dumo and the famous Celeste Bogle, both of them, they try to give us, an idea of the a priori caste as a priori understanding. Dumo talks about caste in 2 binaries, pure and impure, purity and pollution. He tries to say that, and he tried to reduce the whole caste into these 2. Some sections, he tries to explain in terms of purity, that how their purity status is there vis-a-vis the pollution. Whereas the Celeste Bogle, he tries to talk about caste, as a 3-fold, a diagram, when he tried to explain that caste can be understood as hereditary, hereditary specialization of jobs. Then he talks about hierarchy, that there is a hierarchy of professions in the status wise, and there is a factor of repulsion. So it's also very, very interesting understanding which he might have gained through different discourses or sacred legal discourses on caste, that how the hereditary specialization, how a priest is considered at the top of the hierarchy, and how the artisans and those who are doing jobs in the dirty, so-called dirty occupations like skinning the dead animals, making artifacts and the things from the leather, and cleaning sweeping the floors like that. So how they have been reduced to the lowest ebb, of the hierarchy. Then the question of repulsion. It's not only hierarchy, but the repulsion. So the more you are at the higher level, the more you try to repulse the ones who are at the lower level. So there is a subordination, which starts from coming down, and there is a respect. You try to command respect more and more. You're higher, the more and more respect you would achieve it. So this is some sort of a idea which we come to understand about caste. But now, how to make sense of this? We hardly have any studies on this. So when you try to understand, apply the Deleuzian philosophy on this, you will try to find that how all this function. So first of all, the idea is that we find it that we understand caste as a semblance. How caste as a semblance we find to make understanding. So in this case, we find that the legal components of our literature, which tries to explain us in different ways, ultimately they won't help us to understand that caste. So now, within that context, we find it that in a caste society, something is there which keep the caste alive. Here I will try to spend some time on the panopticon of caste. How the panopticon of caste would help to understand the whole system of caste. So now we find it that in the post-colonial India, where we find that a lot of legal conditions were put into operation, that caste should be banned, caste should not be allowed to function, caste should be considered as a legal prohibitions. But still we find that somewhere the caste operates in the society. So now, who is observing that caste? Who is trying to look at that caste? From which angle, from which perspective? Can be explained from the panopticon of caste, which is a diagram of caste, which is an abstract machine of caste. You see, we find it that some of the literature which has come in the form of autobiographies by great writers, both at the South and the North Indian Dalit writers in their autobiographies, they try to explain that how a caste follows an individual belonging to a lower caste, even in the metropolis cities, where we find it that the caste becoming something very, very, although subtle, but again very effective. So who tries to form the caste? Because there are certain legal ways to stop it, but despite that, caste operates. So that idea of caste operating without being visible, without being there, despite the fact that the whole state machinery is trying to curb the caste, but still caste prevails. That makes something quite interesting. From that we can come to know through Deleuze, through the idea of Deleuzian understanding. So in a system that operates in a society, the caste takes the idea of something which goes internalized. So when it becomes internalized through the idea of different assemblages, so those assemblages are not only in a nimbus state, they are not only the territorial state of status, those assemblages are becoming a part of the very being of individual. They start feeling as a part of that whole. So which becomes quite interesting to understand it, the person who belongs to a particular caste category, he not only belongs to that caste category, he starts behaving as if he is the manifestation of that whole.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we have 1 or 2 minutes left. Maybe you have to. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks.
So, from that perspective, the person who is belonging to a specific caste category, he himself or herself tries to ensure it that the whole is a private part of his very being. So, in that case, the caste becomes from an idea of an abstract idea of caste becomes an entity of which remains quite not only operative but also becomes a pure form of manifestation through the person himself. So in this case, we find it that the idea of caste, which we find in Dumos, from pure and impurity, they give us some idea, but when we try to talk about from the Deleuzian perspective, it says that caste is more than a idea of such different equations, but it's a more of a design. It's a more of an abstract machine, and that design is need to be thoroughly probed into. And that's the contribution of the Deleuzian thought into the caste themes. That's what I want to discuss. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much to Professor Rongki Ram for your wonderful presentation on caste. I'm sure there's some connection between caste and sort of the concept of class, right? So maybe we will let Professor Sebastian present first before we, if it's fine with you, and then we will take some questions at the end of both presentation. So I will introduce Professor Sebastian Liao Hao from Taiwan. He's very distinguished. He's now currently a distinguished dean in the Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences, and he's a distinguished professor of English and Comparative Literature in the National Taiwan University. He received his PhD from Stanford University and was a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University. He was visiting professor at the University of Washington, Seattle, and Charles University in Czech, and University of Vienna and Ghent University, Belgium. And he's a visiting fellow at Princeton University, Chicago University, University of Melbourne, and Free University of Berlin. He also served as the president of Comparative Literature Association of Taiwan, ROC, and director of the Deputy of Cultural Affairs of Taipei City Government. Long list of very distinguished projects, and his current research interests include comparative poetics, literary and cultural theories, with a focus on Lacan, Deleuze, and New Materialism, and the Chinese diaspora, among others. His most recent publications are on Deleuze, and they include Becoming Butterfly, Power of the Force, Crystal Image and Taoist Onto-Aesthetics in Deleuze and Asia, and Transversally Yours, Deleuzian Love and Taoist Qing in Deleuze Cultural Encounters. And he also published All Things Are Like a Horse on Radical Post-Humanism, a Taoist ethics for the Anthropocene and beyond. And he also published Of Virus and Man, From Wound to Belief in the World, in the volume Pandemic, Event and Imminence of Life. And his book, which is on Deleuze and Taoism, is forthcoming in October 2022. So let's welcome Professor Sebastian Liao to give us a talk on his latest research. Professor, if you may.
Thank you very much, Tony, for your very generous introduction. Before I proceed to share my views on very preliminary thoughts on the green uncanny, I'd like to just welcome everybody to Taipei for the Deleuze in Asia conference to be held by us and to be taking place next July, early July, from actually the 6th to the 10th. So hopefully by that time, everybody can travel freely, and I'll be there to welcome you all, okay? All right. I think the idea of nature is a very tricky one. Before the Romantic era, writers often wrote about nature as ugly and terrifying, totally unlike the nature we have inherited from Romanticism. Now, as the COVID-19 pandemic drags on, nature seems to have become uncanny again. Why? Because it has since been shrouded with an ominous mystique now that it has been known to be the breeding ground for germs and viruses. The romantic conception of nature as green has been a double-edged sword. It has helped raise our awareness of the human encroachment on the environment, but in the same breath has also alienated the human from the non-human by means of this narrow definition of nature as merely green or as wilderness. As nature has become uncanny, again, that is, when it attracts our attention the way the Heideggerian broken hammer does, it points to our own profound inner lack, actually, according to Lacanian psychoanalysis or DGSIC, that our subjectivity is just a fake. The pandemic then becomes an inviting occasion for expediting a long overdue task, that is to reconceptualize nature as a life or pure immanence. So in the following, I will kind of try to reconceptualize nature in the Deleuzian way, and with some also actually with some input also from Chinese Taoism. Recent discussions of ecology have begun to question the validity of the concept of nature as a material entity separate from the human world. The problem with this dualistic thinking that sets up nature and culture as binary opposites, as at best laments an increasingly shrinking nature, and at worst abandons efforts toward alleviating human destructions of the lived environment. The call to re-examine the concept of wilderness by Willem Cronin in his epoch-breaking essay, The Problem with Wilderness, has sounded the first knell of nature constructed by the Romantic poets as the beautiful and soothing Mother Nature. What they did was cleanse, the Romantic poets did was cleanse the Judeo-Christian ideas of the wilderness and Kantian notions of the sublime from the concept of nature. But in fact, I quote Cronin, "Wilderness hides its unnaturalness behind a mask that is all the more beguiling because it seems so natural. As we gaze into the mirror it holds up for us, we too easily imagine that what we behold is nature with a capital N, when in fact we see the reflection of our own unexamined longings and desires. For this reason, we mistake ourselves when we suppose that wilderness can be the solution to our culture's problematic relationships with the non-human world, for wilderness is itself no small part of the problem," unquote. The problem lies precisely in the danger of separating nature as wilderness from the human world. I quote Cronin again. Idealizing a distant wilderness is Idealizing a distant wilderness so often means not idealizing the environment in which we actually live, the landscape that, for better or worse, we call home. One of my own most important environmental ethics is that people should always be conscious of what they are part of, that they are part of the natural world, inextricably tied to the ecological systems that sustain their life, unquote. But Cronin stopped short of clarifying how this dualism came about and how we can avoid it. And both Latour and Timothy Morton kind of fill up the gap. First, Latour approaches the matter by going back to the origins of all this trouble, the Cape myth, which results in our valorizing nature over politics or culture. because people following Plato's belief that fundamentally politics produces only values. Because people who follow Plato believe that fundamentally politics produces only values, whereas nature provides us with truth. But in fact, I quote Latour, domination of science, not sciences, over nature, not natures. Nothing, in fact, proves that the division of labor between human politics and science of things, between the requirements of freedom and the powers of necessity, can be used as such in order to harbor political ecology, end quote. For Latour, I'm quoting him again, political ecology has nothing at all to do with nature, quote unquote, that blend of Greek politics, French Cartesianism, and American parks. Let me put it bluntly, political ecology has nothing to do with nature, unquote. For him, for Latour, building a common world or new collective for both the human and the non-human is what we need urgently to work toward. The way we go about this is to first and foremost change epistemology into ontology, one that, however, is flat, so that it will highlight what connects nature and cultures, natures and cultures. By unquote. No, sorry, I'm not. I wasn't quoting. Okay. By offering a materialist reconceptualization of ecology, Timothy Morton makes a stronger case against the opposition of nature and culture. It is the material understanding of both the human and the non-human as consisting of matter that connects us with nature. When Timothy Morton says apocalyptically in his book, Ecology Without Nature, unquote, the very idea of nature, which so many hold dear, will have to wither away in an ecological state of human society, unquote. Of course, he is not dismissing nature, but stressing that nature ought not have been reified into a transcendent essence. In other words, nature has to be reconceptualized as matter. But do not mistake for a moment that they are advocating, both Latour and Timothy Morton are advocating returning to Aristotelian hylomorphism. For both Latour and Morton, matter has agency. And to understand the idea of agency, we have to go back to Deleuze and Guattari. I quote, we make no distinction between man and nature. The human essence of nature and the natural essence of man become one within nature in the form of production or industry. Man and nature are not like two opposite terms confronting each other, not even in the sense of bipolar opposites within a relationship of causation, ideation, or expression. Rather, they are one and the same essential reality, the producer product, unquote. To quote Herzogenrath, I'm sorry, I forgot to actually share my PowerPoint. Sorry, terribly sorry about this. Okay, I guess this is what I just read. Now, I'm quoting Herzogenrath now. He's calling this kind of materialism intelligent materialism, I quote. It is basically a call to think complexity, to complex thinking, a way to think the environment as a negotiation of dynamic arrangements of dynamic arrangements of human and non-human stressors, both of which are informed and intelligent, unquote. To emphasize their materialism is not transcendent vitalist. Deleuze and Guattari adopt this apparently bizarre term, machine, to account for an imminent vitalism that befits their ecology. I quote, nature is like an immense abstract machine. Its pieces are the various assemblages and individuals, each of which groups together an infinity of particles entering into an infinity of more or less interconnected relations, unquote. In their case, that nature is no longer a separate and transcendent entity, unquote. I quote, nature as the production of the diverse can only be an infinite sum, that is, a sum which does not totalize its own elements. Nature is not attributive, but rather conjunctive. It expresses itself through and not through is, unquote. Thus, machining nature ensures that, I quote again, neither do differences pass between the natural and the artificial, since they both belong to the machine and interchange there, nor between the spontaneous and the organized, since the only question is one of modes of organization, unquote. Again, what is crucial to this connection between the natural and the artificial is the fact that in Herzogenrath's words, I quote, matter is thus alive, informed rather than unformed, formless. As Deleuze and Guattari argues, matter is not dead, brute, homogeneous matter, but a matter movement bearing singularities or haxieties, qualities, and even operations, unquote. The term, now how do we, the humans, fit into this new materialist reconceptualization of nature? The term haxiety provides a model of subjectivity that lends itself easily to non-anthropocentric blending or returning into matter, as it were, as a life, or life with a capital L, being a mode of individuation very different from that of a person, subject, thing, or substance. The haxiety is both a perfectly individuated multiplicity and becoming an action, rather than a fixed identity. It has neither beginning nor end, origin nor destination. It is always in the middle. It is not made of points, only of lines. It is a rhizome. Rather than being confined in a fixed identity, the haxiety is consistently engaged in rhizomatic flights that slips through the cracks in things and reaches to the plane of immanence. But the haxiety is not a human prerogative, nor is it applied only to the animate beings. The point about the concept of haxiety is to complete a flat ontology suggested by Latour, where all things are treated as equal. Being incorporeal, spelled in-corporeal, the plane of immanence is pre-conceptual and embrace the myriad things indiscriminately and generously. It therefore applies equally to the inanimate and the animate, the artificial and the natural. I was quoting Deleuze and Guattari. Insofar as this plane exists, insofar as on this plane everything exists on equal footing, anything can become a haxiety and has life. I quote Deleuze and Guattari. A season, a winter, a summer, an hour, a date, have a perfect individuality lacking nothing, even though this individuality is different from that of a thing or a subject. They are haxieties in the sense that they consist entirely of relations of movement and rest between molecules or particles, capacities to affect and be affected, unquote. The haxiety is always engaged in a process that is constantly moving between actuality and virtuality, or between the state of affairs and, I quote, the part that eludes its own actualization, unquote. But what prevents us from becoming haxieties? We have to be able to identify where what Cronin calls the wilderness dualism come from dualism through which we see the world, one that subsumes the mind-body dualism and self-world dualism. So from that, from what kind of dualism to which we see the world, in this way. It all comes down to how we perceive the world. With that dualistic perceptual apparatus, we are not able to let go of this dualistic thinking. So we need to unlearn this perceptual habit, this dualistic perceptual habit, and it is a hard process. And Taoism, at this point, can come to our aid. So a little bit of Taoism here. There has been a tremendous amount of discussions of the relevance of Taoism to eco-criticism. And much of it has taken advantage of the concept of 自然. 自然. Okay, much of it has taken advantage of the concept of 自然 as a way of showing how Taoism can bear constructively on ecology. 自然 is often translated into English as nature or natural. However, this equation of 自然 with the Western concept of nature is to confuse two very different traditions and to completely reduce the alternative possibilities Taoism could offer to an ecological discourse that has been dominated by the Western concept of nature, which in the opinion of many materialist eco-critics, has been one of the main culprits that has undermined the goodwill of eco-criticism. Being 自然 in Taoism means to let go of one's egocentric and mundane desires and adhere to the rhythm of the Tao. And thus, a translation that can better approximate the original meaning of 自然 would be as suchness. In one of the two most famous Taoist classics, Tao Te Ching, this most quote renders 自然 the law or principle of the Tao. I quote from Tao Te Ching: man takes his law from the earth takes his law from heaven takes his law from the Tao. The law of the Tao is its being what it is. 自然. So 自然 means being what it is, being what things are. The Tao and 自然 are always connected as the two sides of one coin, but the fact that the Tao is immanent rather than transcendent makes this connection totally unlike the Western transcendent concept of nature. To prove that Tao is completely immanent, one quote will suffice. In the other most famous Taoist classics, Zhuangzi, there's this episode where his friend of the author, the author's Zhuangzi's friend, Dong Guozi, once has this dialogue with him. And he asked Zhuangzi, the author of this classic, what you call the Tao? Where is it? Show me. And Zhuangzi said, it's everywhere. Dong Guozi said, please explain. I don't understand. And Zhuangzi said, well, in the ants. Dong Guozi said, well, can Tao actually exist in the ants? Isn't it kind of low? And Zhuangzi said, in the weeds too. And Dong Guozi says, well, then it's even lower. And Zhuangzi says again, in the bricks. And Dong Guozi said, no, it can't be the case. It can't be true. And Zhuangzi said, well, it can even exist. Tao is even in piss and shit. Okay. So even though Tao, it resides in everything and substends them all, it is often eclipsed. Thus, the sage, or the one who has grasped the intimations of the Tao, I quote, desires, the sage desires what others do not, treasuring what others do not. He learns what others do not, correcting the faults of others. what he does is but following the as suchness of the merits of things and does not have ulterior motives. So to actually learn to adhere to the rhythm of as suchness of 自然, it would take quite a bit of strenuous effort to achieve that. The ultimate result is, the strategy is usually called 无为 or non-action. But this 无为 or non-action, the concept of 无为 or non-action is often misunderstood as not doing anything. Literally, it means not doing anything, but in fact, it doesn't really mean doing anything, but to engage in a strenuous effort to cleanse oneself of goal-oriented, world-opposing obsessions, which is rendered upon us as organization. Okay, so what we have to do is de-organize ourselves. So I'm quoting again this very, very famous. Actually, it occurs a few times in Zhuangzi. So what we need to do is to, there are three concepts here, to 心斋 or 坐忘 or 无上我. But basically, the idea is to cleanse your mind of what you have learned from civilization. Anyway, so the basic strategy is to chop off your limbs, to abolish your ears and eyes, abandon your body and intellect, and attain to the great communion. This is what's called sitting into oblivion, to forget the organization that's been imposed on you. And I'm sure this reminds you very clearly of what Deleuze defined as, body without organs. So the end result is a body without organs. Okay, and let me, I think, move on to the conclusion of my presentation. So in the definition of Taoist philosophy, the Tao is, like suggested earlier by Deleuze and Guattari, is a sum of everything, rather than a being existing outside of the myriad things. So it's the sum total of the myriad of things is Tao itself. Yeah. And so if you add something to Tao, if the world expands, if there's more things that come into being, then Tao expands itself too. So, all right, to sum up, despite the fact that Tao is already there in everything, the goal-oriented human organization with all the mundane values often makes us blind to the Tao. Therefore, one has to look for the Tao in the wounded and ugly, in the neglected and marginalized, in crevices and cracks. But all one does is but return to the rhythm of all things, which is the as suchness already inherent in the myriad things. To become a Taoist sage or a true man is actually to become all things, 物化, to become all things, to turn into all things. In other words, it is becoming a haxiety, or attaining to an existence, I quote from Deleuze and Guattari, closer to animals and rocks, unquote. So this is, how I would like to reconceptualize nature, with the help from Deleuze and the new materialist philosophers, as well as Taoism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sebastian, for your wonderful presentation on issues related to comparative East-West philosophy, and especially to Taoism. Something very refreshing. So we will open the floor for discussions. How much time do we have? We have about Manoj, maybe we have about 15 minutes
Yeah, we can go
or more. Yeah, we
10
can
minutes.
go more.
10
10
minutes.
minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If,
Yeah. So
if required, we can extend it a little further. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So do we have any questions that?
I think there are 2 questions
burning
in chat
questions?
box. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have 2 questions, right? One from KV, right? From KV. So hi, Professor Ronki Ram. We have a question for Professor Ronki Ram. When we are speaking about caste, we are already articulating the multitude, sparsely one among the crores of Indians would be exempted from the presence of this trans individuality in a huge and populous society in his life, okay, in bringing caste to the discourse of annihilation. It is at this level of the multitude that Luz and Guattari would encounter it, while agreeing with you on the question of multiplicities, bringing multiplicities which eventually create assemblages. I'm afraid it is a slippery ground for explaining the call to its annihilation. If the milieu which creates the individuated individuals, etc., of the multitude is forgotten. I'm not sure if there's a question or a comment. Maybe you might want to respond to that, Professor Ronki Ram.
Yes. When we talk about caste to be annihilated, so how we will try to explain it? Would it be a desire to annihilate the caste? Roshni is asking it. How do you understand this desire? So when we try to think of a caste, and when we try to talk about its annihilation, so from that perspective, the desire to annihilate caste does not come out of a semblance which is not a part of the caste assemblies. That desire comes from within the assemblies. Because when we try to talk about a desire, we are not talking about desire from a perspective which is not within the framework of caste. So when Ambedkar is trying to talk about annihilation of caste, he was trying to create a new assemblies which would replace caste. So then when we try to take a new, the idea of taking into a Buddhism, Nava Buddhism, which Eleanor Joliet and Gail Ombit calls Nava Buddhism, he tried to come out of the assemblies of the 4 systems of Varna and tries to come out of the 4 ashrams and leaving the larger assemblies, which is Hinduism, and leaving Hinduism and coming into a new form of a Buddhism. So his desire was to come out of this, system of caste. So from that angle, desire, need to be further probed into. The desire is not, a fish can't desire out of the water. When fish desire, the fish will desire within the water. It's quite problematic. How would you desire when each and every part of your being is perforated with the system? You can't desire, like a slave who has been put into slavery. You try to free him. He does not like to go out. He wants to again come into the prison. So this is such a difficult, complex theme which we are trying to understand. Because here, panopticon of caste keeps you watching, even if you leave the Hindu fold, if you go to other. Thereby, the Buddhist in India or the Christian in India, they are much more known by their pre-conversion identities. Their identities are not diluted. So they take conversion where the baggage of caste goes with them. So there we find caste even start evolving within Buddhism, within Christianity, within Islam, even within Sikhism. Because those fellows who were a victim of such assemblages, they brought the bags with that. So this is quite problematic. And the second question is very interesting by KB Civil, he tries to talk about that, agreeing with you that on the question of multitudes bringing multiplicity, which eventually creates assemblies. So he said, I'm afraid it is slippery ground for explaining the call to its annihilation. If the milieu which creates the individuated individual, that's of multitude, is forgotten. Yes, I think I have answered it in my first question. I agree with him, because it is a multitude of assemblies. But the question is, can we, unless we try to understand the diagram or the abstract machine of caste, and we try to pinpoint the panopticon of caste, we would not going to make a sense of the caste assemblies. Because caste assemblies would remain, like a Kantian concept. And I will take only a few seconds. Kant talks about concept which born of the intuition. Because for Kant, concept is born of intuition. For Deleuze, concept is a creation. And he did not explain us how the creation takes place, but still we find much references. But when we say Kant says that concept is born of intuition. Now the question is this: what form intuition? What creates intuition? Are intuitions created by some concepts? What about those concepts which create intuition? And what is the concept which comes out of intuition? So intuitions are created, by memories. And memories are created by assemblies. So memories are much important. So thereby, I was trying to talk about how caste territoriality lives in memory, and how those memories survive in a society. Then they get contradiction in the nation. So the memories of caste are much more subtle assemblies. The memory, you say that, oh, I want to believe in the caste, but memory is there. Your memory becomes something more important. So these are very, very issues which we need to, like, the last speaker who was talking about, Stephen, he was trying to talk about that the sage is one who not only uses his eyes, who don't only use his ears, who don't use his limbs, and he is a sage. We find it, the similar equation in Indian philosophy. Bin akhi dekhna, bin kanni sunna. Without seeing without eyes and hearing without ears. That is a sage. But these are the very important themes, which again we find it on the one side of the life in Indian context. We have a philosophy which is purely based on certain saintly observations. But at the same time, we find that such caste divisions exist. How the memories live in the society. That needs to be further probed into. Then I will agree with Sybil that the question of multitudes would not be forgotten. Multitudes would remain there in the memory. And how the memory and assemblance would be related is a quite daunting task. I don't know whether I was able to explain my viewpoint clearly, because these are the things which I'm nowadays thinking very, very closely, because issues are much more complex. And Deleuzian understanding makes a lot of, because here we find that the rational transcendental synthesis of the Kantian would not help us, because a priori and a posteriori observations to understand knowledge are two opposite themes. How we can experience, can be experienced without the given factors? How we can experience? The idea of my panelist is very nice. How a sage experience the world, it would be different from a person who has not been initiated into that sainthood. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Ronki Ram, for your wonderful answers. So we have a second question. We have another question for Professor Sebastian, and the question is from Roshni. Roshni watched Gaia, which is a film released in 2021, which envisioned a sort of wilderness for the post-human future. So if you have watched the film, Roshni would like to ask Professor Sebastian if you have watched the film, and would you like to have a response to that film, whether it is akin to the Tao?
Okay. Whether what?
Whether it is akin, whether the wilderness in the post human future is the same,
all right,
resonant to the Tao. Yeah.
You know, I actually haven't seen the film, but I know about it. I've known something about the film. You know, approximately the plot, the approximate plot of the film. It reminds me actually of the film Annihilation. You know, they're kind of similar in the sense that, you know, nature is, quote unquote, fighting back or taking over human world, things like that. Yeah. Whether or not that represents the kind of envisions the kind of post-human future of the earth, I don't know. I mean, there may come a day that nature would actually strike back at the humans, but I definitely would not say that it has anything to do with the Tao, because like the Tao, it doesn't do anything, unlike God. You know, God is always trying to, you know, teach us a lesson somehow, from Job to the very modern times. Maybe the virus is sent by God too. I don't know, but Tao is just almost the opposite of God. You know, Tao doesn't do anything. You have to seek it out. You have to cleanse yourself of all these egocentric desires and mundane obsessions in order to feel Tao again. So we're born with Tao. We live in Tao, but we don't know. We have become blind to it. But in both, I think in both the film Annihilation, as well as probably also Gaia, the idea of Gaia is very different from the new material. I mean, in both these films, you know, the Gaia is very aggressive. And I think, you know, when Latour talks about Gaia, he's not talking about, he's trying very hard to, you know, to let's say, turn the idea of Gaia around. Okay, so that Gaia is, on the one hand, you know, everything that we have on Earth, including us. But on the other hand, Gaia is not like, you know, he is being heard and is crying and all, and so one day, you know, he may, or she, I'm sorry, she may revenge or avenge herself. So that's not even the idea of Gaia espoused or suggested by Latour. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't exclude the possibility that one day the Earth might strike back, you know, but I don't know, you know, because we know actually not a very little about Earth or actually about things or objects. So maybe, you know, like the OOO philosophers suggest, you know, actually, like for instance, Timothy Morton, he actually suggests that, you know, every object has an inner wound too, a trauma, like a birth trauma thing there. And so they're also trying to, like human beings, trying to defend themselves from being hurt. And I don't exclude the possibility that Earth is like, you know, like that too. And if you can envision that, if you, for instance, can imagine for a minute that the virus is actually striking back because as a response to or revenge to our impingement on their habitat, then of course Earth can do that too. So if you conceive Gaia as Earth rather than everything on Earth, including us, then Earth as an object may, of course, strike back like the virus has been doing. Okay, but it has nothing to do with the Tao.
Okay, thanks, Professor Sebastian, for your wonderful reply to the question. Are there any more questions? or
I would like to just
comments?
share, some
Yes.
stuff with Professor Sebastian, but not
Okay.
now. So I'll contact him.
All
via
right.
mail. So thank you, Tony.
you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Minu. So are there any further questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, there's no further question. Manoj, shall we?
Yeah. We can
Yeah.
conclude the session, Tony.
Yeah. Shall we conclude
Yeah,
the
please.
session?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we had a wonderful session by Professor Ronki Ram and Sebastian on the very important issues like caste, and the Tao. And I think this is a very interesting session, which involves cross-cultural dialogue, intercultural comparative philosophy dialogue. And yeah, personally, I do a little bit of a Deleuze and Buddhist work as well. And I think there's a lot more to be done since we are in a global age. And I hope that we can keep in touch, and that more of these sessions will help us to have cross-cultural understanding, and more research can be done in this area. So we will maybe end our session, end our current session, and maybe Manoj, we can go for a break
No.
after this session.
Yes, we'll be
Yeah.
starting with
Short
non-plenary
break.
session 7.
Yeah, we're starting with
Yeah,
non-plenary.
Right away.
Yeah,
Right away.
yeah.
Right
Right
Manoj?
away.
Yeah.